Hi, everyone. My name is Asha Creary, and I am a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Texas and a licensed professional counselor supervisor in the state of Missouri. And in today's episode of Post Grad with Asha, we're going to be going over the NCE, or the National Counselor Exam. So for this particular episode, we're not going to get into any questions. We're just going to break down the domain and the subsections of the domain, or the different bullet points of each domain, but we're going to focus on the first domain today. After this episode, there will be another episode that is going to have questions that would possibly or could possibly come from the first section. So I anticipate that the videos will be in order. So we'll go through domain 1 in this video. We'll go through questions that align with this domain in the next video. Then we'll get into the following domain. Then we'll get into the following domain questions, or questions that could align with the following domain. So let's get into it. The first subject domain of the NCE is professional practice and ethics. These are things you probably would have learned in practicum. So think, how do I perform ethically? How do I practice ethically? And how do I maintain professionalism while maintaining counseling relationships with clients? So this subsection only counts for about 12% of the test, and it is going to consist of 19 questions, or 19 scored items on the real test. This section encompasses counselors' knowledge, skills, and abilities related to maintaining proper administrative and clinical protocols. So we'll get into the subsections. So the first bullet point is going to be assess the counselor competency to work with a specific client. So for this particular bullet point underneath the domain of professional practice and ethics, this one would include your level of competence to work with a client of a different race, a sexual orientation, gender presentation, ability to work with specific disabilities, specific age group, and the list goes on. Sometimes we're given clients we just do not want to work with. So when you're processing this, try not to think about not wanting to work with the client, or when you're answering questions regarding clients that would be hard for you to treat, think about, can I actually help this client? Not, I don't want to treat this client, i.e., I can't help them. Think, okay, best case scenario, if I had a client that came in that I could potentially struggle with, do I have the competency or the skills necessary to treat this client ethically? Okay. The second bullet point underneath this subsection is going to be understand statistical concepts and methods in research. So this will include ethics in research, participant rights, limitations and potential harm in research, reliability versus validity, research bias, quantitative research, qualitative research, descriptive research, inferential research, research design, and so much more. This particular section is probably where that mathematics is going to come into play heavily. Now, your test is not going to be filled with a bunch of math-related research questions. You might get 3 or 4 questions that are going to be math-related regarding research or statistics. And again, a lot of it will be interpretation of the data, or it will be how do you best, or, let's analyze this data. What is the correlation of this? What is the mean, median, mode of this, or range? It will be a lot of along the lines of that. So the next bullet point is going to be practice legal and ethical counseling. So this would include maintaining appropriate counseling relationships, not engaging in dual relationships, not harming clients, ethical billing practices, not providing services that you're not trained in, and so much more. So when you think about legal and ethical clients, 1, are you marketing yourself as you're supposed to going forward with clients? Are you transparent in the type of services that you offer? Are you performing ethically in interacting with your clients, making sure that you don't have dual relationships, intimate relationships, inappropriate relationships, or just, again, inappropriate relationships? That's what you're going to think there. Clarify counselor client roles. So in this particular section or subsection of this particular domain, you're going to think about maintaining proper boundaries in the patient-client relationship. Once it is established, it's going to be clarifying counselor roles and sessions, identifying limitations in your role, and identifying the client's role in treatment, planning, and implementation, tools and skills in between sessions. So yes, you are the practitioner. Yes, you are the person who is going to be supporting your client throughout their journey, but your client also has roles in the therapeutic relationship. So think, is the client attempting to implement the strategies, the tools, and the techniques that we discuss in therapy? Also think, does your client have a misconception of the role that you perform or the role that you are in within the counselor therapeutic relationship? Also think, what are the limitations in what you do or perform with your clients, and how does that impact how your role in the therapeutic relationship? So just think, what's my relationship like with my client? And does my client understand what my role is in this relationship? And making sure that your relationship is a therapeutic relationship, not a dual relationship, not a friendship, not a landlord, not none of that. And I mentioned that because there's going to be some episodes later on down the line, we're going to get into ethics, and I'll be all kind of stuff in there. So the next subsection of this domain is going to be clients' rights and responsibilities. So clients have the right to a confidential space, good faith estimates, rights to access their records, rights to decline the use of insurance, rights to the board information. So if they ask you, how do I file a formal complaint? You have to provide them with the board information, although that should be in your intake forms, and that should be listed somewhere on the website for your clients to be able to access that in your Q&A form, your fax form, or somewhere on the website. But again, it should be in your intake forms if it's not anywhere else. It should also include proper documentation prior to beginning services. So this is making sure your clients have completed their intake forms. This is obtaining form of ID. This is clients being able to speak up about their experience in the therapeutic relationship. These clients should be communicating with you, and they have responsibilities as well. So again, they have so many rights. So just think, when you're treating a client, it's not about how I feel. It's not about what I want. It's not about what I think. It is about, what does this client have in consideration to rights when it comes to receiving services. So think confidentiality, think HIPAA, think records, think termination of services, think complaints, think requesting a different level of care, think that. Limitations of confidentiality is the next subsection of this domain. So limitations in confidentiality come into play when you see minors, depending on the situation, when a client has expressed a plan or intent to harm themselves or someone else. It also comes in instances in which a client has reported abuse, or if you believe that abuse is happening. And then limits also show up if you're subpoenaed to provide records or speak in court following a lawsuit that is against you, following a request to be in front of the board because they are reviewing your case from a formal complaint that was submitted. And this will also be in situations where you're working with a minor and both parents have access to records, but only one parent might have signed them up. There's a lot that goes into confidentiality. So when you think limits of confidentiality, always think, what are the 4 instances in which I can break confidentiality? Plan and intent to harm someone else or someone else, harm myself or someone else, instances of abuse, suspected abuse, reported abuse, instances in which you have a minor that you're working with. So not that the minors won't have confidentiality per se, but depending on their age, there are no rules on confidentiality as far as you disclosing things to the parents. Now, when they are over a certain age, there are rules to when you're disclosing information to parents or guardians. So just be mindful of that. And then the fourth part is if you're ever forced to go to court for whatever the reason is, if you're subpoenaed, if a parent is like, I need to see my child's records, I want them to be able to speak in court, we're going through a custody battle, I'm suing this clinician because whatever the reason is, or I'm going to file a formal complaint against them in the board. So think court, harm, abuse, and minors. Those are your four. Okay, so next one is explain counselor agency policies. Okay, don't think overall counseling, think what happens at this designated location that I work at. So again, explain counselor agency policies. So if you're working with a client and this is not your practice, you work at an agency, you work at a school, you work at a hospital, you work for a private practice that you don't own, or you work for your own company. So every one of those companies have different policies regarding how to engage with clients, documentation, billing, cancellation policies, the things. So when you think of describing agency policies, you should be able to describe the agency-based policies, rules, and procedures. These are not things that are necessarily listed in your code of ethics. These are things that, how will this make business run smoother? How would this make it easier for the clients to get signed up, scheduled, and, move through their therapeutic relationship? This may include policies on how your clients request records. This may include, again, the cancellation policy. And these may include how do you enter the building, how do you exit the building, how to communicate with me in between sessions. Again, some clinicians have cell phones, separate cell phones, but if you're working for a company, you probably don't have a cell phone, depending on where you work, right? If you work for CPS or some other state agency, you may have a cell phone that clients can contact you on, and you may be on call. In other instances, like people in private practice, you communicate with us directly through the portal, you know what I'm saying? Or you call the front office, you cancel through the front. If there's an emergency, to call a local agency, because we don't have the capacity to engage with emergencies outside of business hours, because we are not a 24-hour based facility, company, or organization. So just think policies for this specific location. And if you're, when you're taking your test, typically they're going to give you the environment, such as, is it a hospital? Is it a school? Is it a private practice? Is it an agency? Is it a prison system? Whatever. Then it's going to give you the scenario, or it's going to ask you what's best practice for this type of agency or something of the nature. Again, we'll get into questions in the next episode, but I kind of wanted to break that down in case you have not been in a situation where you've really engaged with the agency policies as far as like how to participate in something. Because again, it depends on your practicum site. If you have a good practicum site, then you may have been able to really explain and thoroughly describe agency policies. If you're at a facility, agency, practice, school, whatever, who doesn't have an intake coordinator, you may be doing some of that describing of agency policies. If they have an intake coordinator or someone who answers the phones or things like that, you may or may not necessarily need to describe agency policies in depth, but you should be able to go over some of that stuff with your clients. Okay. Next subsection of this domain is going to be review payment, fees, and insurance benefits. So this would include sending out that good faith estimate, specifically to all of your clients who have insurance. Rule of thumb, send it to everybody so that people know what they're signing up for. Okay, good faith estimates. Discussing diagnosis, diagnostic codes, how that impacts their insurance, how that impacts billing. That needs to be discussed with your clients. And if you're new to private practice and you are learning about it, you may not be very knowledgeable or be able to answer these questions unless you've been the person that's been verifying insurance or doing the things, right? Now, there are some places where you don't do nothing with insurance. So they may have an intake coordinator, they may have a billing department who really goes into these policies. But if they have a question, you should be able to say, hey, like, you're going to talk to this person here at the company. I don't do anything with finances, whatever. So just think that. Also think refunding overpayments. Again, the questions could vary, right? It depends on the settings. So overpayments, or if the insurance companies pays you something and it covers the copay or the deductible, or they met something from this month to next month and you didn't realize that you weren't supposed to collect payment, you have to refund people their money. You have to give people their money back. So knowing that, how to track payments, depending on your licensing board, the language for it will describe where, even in the ACA, you're supposed to keep track of payments, the refunds, what the payments were for, any adjustments, the different things like that. Also think, how do you collect copays and deductibles? So again, if you are in a private practice, you're probably the one having these conversations with your clients, or again, you might have an admin who verifies insurance and talks to clients about insurance. So another part you're going to think about is procedural codes, medical necessity, the things. All of that falls under this subsection. So review payment fees and insurance benefits is a subsection, and under that you're going to think, what are the rules for insurance? What are the rules for collecting, refunding, and adjusting payments, sliding scales, those things. And then also, how can I communicate with my clients about their insurance benefits? Oh, and you're going to think insurance fraud. You're going to think insurance fraud in that section. Okay, so the next subsection is going to be explain the counseling processes, procedures, risks, and benefits. So this would be the therapist discussing how the first to fourth session will be held. You provide homework, treatment plans, potential for harm, what counseling can help with, and more. So think intake, think informed consent, think, let me tell this client how their experience is going to be as they work with me, what the first few sessions look like, how frequent, we may or may not meet. Think, how do you give homework? Do you give treatment plans? When do you review those? Think the risks in providing counseling, depending on the type of counseling you're providing. And then think, what can counseling help with? What your limitations are? Think all of that. Explain the uses of social media. So we are in a space where everybody has a social media account, whether they use it or not, or if they used to, they've inactivated it, but they can always get back on it, right? That's the space that we're in. So explain uses and limits of social media. Social media is a huge part in how we interact with the public. Our goal is to ensure that our clinicians are aware that we cannot be friends on our personal pages, but they can follow the business page or professional page. But you also have to let them know that if they find you on social media, or you're free, do you know this person, how it does on Facebook, how it does on Instagram, how it does on LinkedIn, just letting them know, like, hey, I'm not looking for you, but if you come across my page, I'm blocking you, and vice versa. Letting your clients know, like, what the boundaries are, how to engage on social media. You're also going to let your clients know that you will not look your clients up on social media. Now, there are some situations where you may have, what's the term? I don't want to use the word like elite clients, but your VIP clients. If you're a fan of them, that's going to be hard, right? Because if you've been searching them, if you've been reading content on them, whatever, it may be hard to separate the two, but making sure that you understand that you cannot be friends with this person on social media, and that you will not intentionally look these people up or try to engage with them on social media. The next thing is, in the same subsection, is when it comes to social media or web presence, period, if they leave comments under your business page and say, hey, this is my therapist, they're amazing, you guys should book them. Or you know how when people are on Facebook and they're like, hey, any therapist recommendations in the area that specialize in this, and people say, well, I go to this, my kid goes here, da 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 da. Just letting your clients know, at that point, they have breach their own confidentiality, and to just let them know, like, you can leave reviews on Google, you can let other people know who your clinician is, like, you can do all the things, but just note that there are limitations in what you just did. You just told the world that you are receiving services from me. I can't confirm nor deny that I see you or treat you as a client. So for this particular subsection of social media, just think, we can be friends. You can follow, like, subscribe to the business page, but just note that any comments that you leave, depending on what you're putting on there, you are releasing your confidentiality. I will not confirm or deny what has happened online, and I will not be looking you up as my client. Okay? It's kind of hard because, again, we're in a space where everybody's connected. And if you're in a small city, it is so easy to come across your clients on social media, especially if you're of a certain ethnic group in a small town and it's only a few of y'all, right? So just think what not to do on social media. So the next part is a subsection of this domain is inform clients about the legal aspects of counseling. So this is where you tell your clients, hey, if this happens and I'm required to speak on behalf of something you did, right? Let's say you have a client who went out and did some drunk driving and they are in counseling for drinking and driving, or DUIs and DWIs, and they go out and they do it again, but yet they were required to go to therapy, right? Maybe you didn't know that. You just thought that they were a client coming to work on substance use. Sometimes clients don't disclose things until you're asked to be in court about it. So just be mindful that you let your clients know, like, hey, if you subpoena me, or if a judge tells me that I have to attend court or that I have to release records, of course, I'm going to talk to my lawyer first and make sure I'm doing it the right way to make sure I don't lose my license. But remember, there's no limitations in what I can communicate about and what I will communicate about, because I'm being asked to appear in court. Then also letting your clients know that you can't have a dual relationship, 1. And 2, depending on what you're subpoenaed to go to court for, you may be required to terminate services. Just making sure your clients know that ahead of time. So think that. Also, talk about how the notes may be used in court. Some clinicians have psychotherapy notes and progress notes, or public notes and private notes, depending on how you want to label it, right? Everybody uses different terms, but public notes are not truly public, but these are the notes that can be requested by the insurance companies if they're using insurance. It can be requested by their employers if they are doing FMLA. It can be requested whatever by them. They can be asking you to send their records somewhere. But you also have your private notes. Private notes don't go with the regular records request for insurance. They don't typically go to your job. They're usually clinical impression, or they're direct quotes that you use in therapy related to your symptoms. So in these particular instances, those are the notes that the court also gets to see, right? The judge gets to see. The judge gets to ask for them. The custody order lawyers and people, right? They get to get that. So think legal, right? When I'm seeing this client, what am I legally bound to do? Also think about the limitations of working with minors. Also think about mandatory reporting, those things, ethics. The next one is obtain informed consent. So again, not only will informed consent just be a signature, you're going to make sure that it's verbal. So when you do your intake form, you're going to say, hey, this is who I am. This is the limitations. These are my skills. These are my abilities. This is how you cancel. This is the cost for every single session. Do you have any questions about the information on the intake forms? This is something to make note of in this section. Also, your informed consent should include certain information. So some licensing boards require some things, some require others. But rule of thumb, you're going to always make sure that your license details are listed on the informed consent, how to file form complaints on your consent. You're not going to be having people file formal complaints on you every day. I hope not. hopefully not at all, right? Every now and then you might end up in a situation where it might have been a misinterpretation or you really did something. But for the sake of this particular section, think, again, how to file formal complaints, your license type, your degree, your educational kind of background, how to communicate with you between sessions, limitations of therapy, risks of therapy, an insurance excerpt if you take insurance, whether it's details on like co-payments versus deductibles, whether it's, hey, because you're using insurance, you have to use a diagnostic code, hey, insurance can request records, or hey, we're going to do everything in our power, but you are responsible for knowing what your copay, your deductibles are. You're going to think to include on your intake form your fees in case insurance doesn't cover it, EAP doesn't cover it. Mandatory reporting, you're going to put a little section in there for that. You're going to talk about duty to warn, and then alternatives to counseling. So when you think intake, think, what can I put in writing that this client needs to know about this experience? Again, there are certain requirements for certain states, but for the sake of the NCE, think license, limitations, communication between sessions, payments, fees, mandatory reporting situations, working with minors, excerpt if you work with minors, cancellation fees, duty to warn, risks, benefits, experience, license number, license type. Think that when it comes to intake. Again, you will verbally still go over this every time you meet a new client or anytime you make changes to your intake form and you're asking for them to sign new intake forms. The next one is discuss confidentiality as it applies to electronic communication. So again, for this subsection of this domain, think HIPAA, think computers, think cell phones, think email, think text, think electronic health records, think anything technology related, think social media, whatever. So everyone uses some sort of electronic health records or electronic platform to communicate with clients. When discussing this section, discuss policies related to texting, emailing, or using the electronic health records system or patient portal. Discuss how electronic communication may be used and the limitations of it. For example, if you have an electronic health records system, you will have clients that will try to send you, hey, I'm suicidal. If you communicate with your clients via text, when will you respond to those? Again, my rule of thumb is no texting with clients, but there are some clinicians that do it because they have a separate cell phone for it. Not to go down the rabbit hole, but I'm about to go down it, right? If you got a client who's texting you around the clock and you're responding around the clock, and let's say they are an acute psychotic, they're dealing with SI, whatever, and that one night you tired, you don't see your phone and they text you and normally you would respond, and they go and they commit because you didn't respond to their message, think. You created that dynamic, you gave them the leeway, and it might just be your fault. But anyway, this is why I don't do text messages. Communicate with me through the portal. Just note that we're not manning the portal all day. If it's an emergency, call the local facilities, that stuff. So think also, what are the limitations in communicating through electronics? If you're emailing me through a business email, I'm about to go down another rabbit hole. If you're emailing me and you see @gmail.com or you see @yahoo.com or you see @AOL or you see @Microsoft or iCloud, just note that is not a business compliant email address. I know some clinicians gonna get mad at me for saying this out loud, right? But if that clinician does not have a business associate agreement with that insurance company and their email, or that clinician and that clinician's emailing you and their account gets breached, your information gets breached. There's no business agreement. There is no one at fault, especially if it's like a situation where the Google gets hacked and your informations get leaked. all your intake form may have been sent electronically via email. I don't know how people do their stuff. Everybody's different. But there are limitations to the confidentiality of using email. Again, the clinician will be at fault, but if Google is hacked, Google's not at fault for your information being released. But if that clinician has a business associate agreement and Google gets hacked, Google's at fault for your information being released. So just remember that if you're working with a clinician, they got at Yahoo, at Gmail, they need to be getting a business email. Again, that's a whole different rabbit hole. I said all that to say is think, what are the limitations of confidentiality if they're texting you? Think, what are the limitations of confidentiality if they are emailing you? What are the limitations of confidentiality if they call? Can you leave a confidential voicemail? Do they give you permission to email them? Do they give you permission to text them? What's the rules when it comes to confidentiality? Okay, next, establish group rules, expectations, and termination criteria. So again, this is groups. Think group therapy class, the group process, that. So in this section, you will be responsible for knowing the group cycle, how to establish group rules, ethics in holding a group expectations, when termination may be necessary, communicating within the group, discuss if it's an open or a closed group, and any other group concern as it relates to rules, expectations, and termination. All right. So the next subsection of this section is assess competency to provide informed consent. So as I mentioned before, you're going to always get signature unless the competency is not there, or unless there's a situation where they have visual, hearing, or they don't have any limbs and they can't sign informed consent. So general knowledge of informed consent will be necessary to provide informed consent. You cannot do informed consent with the 2-year-old. Now, you can do informed consent with the parent of the 2-year-old, and then when you're working with the kid, when they come in after you start working, you can kind of use kid-friendly language to describe what's happening or what they are there for. But the 2-year-old's not signing consent for services. One, they don't have the competency, the ability, nor will they understand, nor are they legally allowed. I'm gonna leave that there. This would include everything from informed consent section discussed before. So earlier we talked about informed consent, what needs to be included in the intake forms and the informed consent forms. But always remember, does the client have the ability to receive this information? And can they receive it in a traditional way? And if they can't, what are some of the accommodations that you may have to implement in order for you to ensure that they understand or the competency is there regarding informed consent? So again, this would include if you're working with an adult client, they have vision and hearing impairments, or you're working with someone who does sign language, or you're working with someone who needs support, or a client who has a guardian, an adult client who has a guardian, a minor client who has a guardian. You're going to make sure if a client has a scribe, if a client has vision or hearing impairment, if the client needs an interpreter, if the client has a learning disability in which they may not understand the informed consent, you're going to verbally or try your best to go over as much information on the informed consent. You're also going to reduce the language that you're using to the grade level or hopefully the speech levels of your particular potential client. In these cases, you will need to know how to provide consent in the best way and know when the best time is to include a witness while you're doing the intake forms or while the client's doing intake forms. Again, if you got a client who's visually or hearing impaired, you may want to bring in the front office admin and you guys both sit with them, talk to them, ask questions, and you both sign it, and you have the client sign it. And then next to it, you put client has vision, hearing impairments, whichever person went over what. And then you can list the questions that the client might have had just for your sake and just for your records, but know when to bring in a witness to help with informed consent with the client. The next subsection is going to be monitor the therapeutic relationship and build trust as needed. You will be required to know when to refer a client out due to the ineffectiveness of services. You'll need to know how to determine the therapeutic approach or styles needed that need to be altered when you're working with a client. You'll need to know when trust has been broken and may need repair. And you will have to monitor for dual relationships within sessions or clients, because dual relationships can be interpreted, right? Like if you've been with a client for, let's say, 3 or 4 years and you cannot get rid of this client, they keep coming back and they do stuff like, hey, I want you to come to the wedding. Hey, can you show up to this? Hey, like, I'm gonna send you this. Or you're my friend. Make sure your clients understand what the therapeutic relationship really is and correcting your clients. Again, that kind of goes back to roles and responsibilities earlier. When you have a long-term client, clients oftentimes develop a sense of additional ways in which they can seek or obtain guidance that is beyond your realm of services. Sometimes clients feel they can invite you to their baby showers, weddings, birthday parties, and more. This would be outside of your counseling duties and beyond the counseling relationship. So for this particular subsection, monitoring the therapeutic relationship and build trust is needed. Monitor, do you feel like you've received the level of care you needed today? Do you feel safe today? Is there anything I can change my approach? Hey, that's not my role, but I can support you navigating that from within the office. Just making sure you're having those conversations as you're treating your client. Review client records. Records is going to be a huge part of your life, whether you like it or not. None of us like them, but I'm gonna just say that. Okay, you will need to be aware how to maintain or dispose of clients' records, of course, based on your state rules. You need to know when you need to make an addendum, which is a correction to a patient record, or when you need to redact a record, which means delete a record because you might have accidentally saved the wrong content under a client because you weren't paying attention. When to redact that, but you have to put in a actual chart for that session, that client. But when you redact it, you cannot delete the deleted charts. So you got to know how to maintain records. You also need to review billing frequently. That is a part of your client's records. You also want to make sure that records are properly maintained and organized. So if you did a PHQ-9, if you did a safety plan, if you did a suicide screener, and you put that in their records, like their progress notes that you did that, and if I come in from the state or the board and I audit your records, or the insurance company and they audit your records and you don't have evidence that you did that, just know. So again, review client records and do it frequently. So that's that whole section, review records. What's in it? Did you need to make corrections? What's going on with billing? And making sure that you have everything planned, organized, and properly maintained and organized. The next part is provide adequate accommodations for clients with disabilities. Same with informed consent. If you got clients with disabilities, you have to determine what the accommodations could or should be for these clients. So each client has various needs, and some clients have disabilities that require additional accommodations or supports on the therapist's end. This may be clients needing an interpreter, braille supports, repeating statements. So just like if you've ever worked in a school system or whatever, think, what kind of accommodations would I give a student? So when you're working with clients, again, do you need to repeat certain statements? Do you need to shift the language? Do you need to use images or diagrams for some of your clients? Do you need to use accommodations, physical accommodations, speech language accommodations? The different types of accommodations. They're fleeting my mind, but they will be on the questions in the next video. So a language barrier is not considered a disability. We would put it here so that you know when an interpreter is needed. Okay, the next section, I don't know why this jumps around and why everything's not in order, but this is how it's listed on the NCE snapshot. So provide information to third parties. This is important because as you heard me mention before regarding records, keeping them, having them organized and maintained. And when we revert all the way back to informed consent, what needs to be on those? Do you have signatures, custody orders, the things? You're required to be knowledgeable about the ethics around sharing information. Also think HIPAA, think PHI, think confidentiality in maintaining documentation. Of course, when using insurance, you are required to adhere to the contract policy regarding audits. If you're taking insurance, you're going to get audited at some point. Whether you are committing insurance fraud or not, insurance have to audit companies that are billing clients for medical necessity. So just note that if you have a contract with an insurance company or 5 or 10 panels, you're going to get subpoenaed at some point. It's just a matter of when. You need to know when a release of information is required. You will need to know how to respond to subpoena requests, especially when you're working with kids. You would need to know how to communicate with other providers when a release is sent to you. You'll need to know how to respond to record requests from FMLA, from disability offices, from clients themselves, from other providers, and more. And sometimes it's just as simple as sending the records or communicating with a parent. But sometimes it's not, and you may have to involve your lawyer to support with responding to some of the records requests, especially if you intend to work with minors. So the reason this section is so important is because although you may get subpoenaed to attend court, you still may not be required to provide records, because you might be seeing a minor and one parent brings them in, and one parent is a parent that has sole custody rights based on the custody order agreement that you have on file that you got before you start seeing that client, right? It might have the other parent has no rights. And so the parent may be saying, hey, I'm going to court for partial rights. And I know my kid's been in therapy, so I want to know what they've been in there talking about. And is it going to help my case? So if that parent doesn't have rights and his lawyer subpoenas you, or her lawyer subpoenas you, whichever parent it is, and they're not listed on the custody documents, you have to kind of get a lawyer involved because you have to respond to it, but you want to make sure you respond to it ethically. Again, I'm crossing a whole different line, but just knowing, how do you actually respond to records requests? Is it from insurance? Is it from a lawyer? Or is it from a client? Who wants them? Do I have a release on file? If I don't have a release on file, do I need to obtain one? And I'm not confirming or denying that this is my client, but I will respond how I'm supposed to respond ethically. On the NCE, you need to know, again, how to respond to records requests. Do you just release records, or do you have a release of records on file? Who are you communicating with? Verifying identity, confidential facts, deadlines, timelines, the things. The next section is going to be providing referral sources if counseling services are inadequate or inappropriate. That is the next subsection. You will be responsible for knowing when to send referrals to a client. Sometimes we are not a great fit for a client, and other times we're just not equipped to support a client, and an appropriate referral may be necessary. We're not referring clients out because we don't like them, unless you're harming the client because you don't like them. But we are aware of when we're supposed to refer clients. If I'm not a trauma specialist or a trauma-focused CBT therapist, and somebody's coming in and they want me to work with them on trauma, and that is not my specialty, and I know I don't do trauma because I don't know nothing about it, right? We learn about it, but it might not be my forte. I know I'm not going to see this client. Now, on the intake forms, they might not have put that because some people just don't trust healthcare industries, or they just didn't want to put it, or they just barely filled out the intake forms and they didn't include it. Once you get in there with that client and you realize, hey, we not a fit, refer a client out. So you just need to know when to refer a client out for this particular section. The next one is advocate for professional and client issues. So You will be responsible to participate in advocacy for your clients. This can sometimes show up when working with clients who don't know how to support themselves in spaces that are causing the symptoms to be present. This may show up and in supporting a client and advocating within the education system regarding their accommodations. This may include supporting a client in how to advocate for themselves in the workplace. This may include you supporting a client through advocating for special healthcare requests or better healthcare quality. Depends on the situation, right? But your job is to support and advocate for your client. If you work for an agency and your client is not getting their needs met, and you're working with that client, and because their needs are not getting met, it's impacting the therapeutic process, or if you see that they don't know what they need, not that they don't know, but maybe they don't know how to verbalize or feel confident or safe enough to speak about what their needs, that is your job. On the flip side of it, always remember we're not physicians, but we can support our clients in developing statements or language to help self-advocate or knowing when to reach out to the physician with concerns on behalf of your client if they gave you a release to communicate freely with their healthcare provider, nutritionist, dietitian, or whoever else is included in their healthcare, in their holistic care, right? Now, advocating for professional issues, that is exactly what it is. So if you are a clinician and you realize that something is impacting your ability to be a professional, or if you have too big of a caseload, or if you're in a situation where you need more training on a said subject because you're starting to see it pop up in your office, whatever, your job is to advocate for professional growth and development, not only for yourself, but for the profession as a whole. So I'll use Texas as an example. In Texas, we usually have advocacy days where we go down to the state and talk to our representatives regarding the services we provide, including access, quality of services, the shortage of providers, getting student loans paid off, higher panel fees for the services we provide, the things. So the next subsection is going to be seek supervision and consultation. This should be so easy because if you've been in practicum, you've sought consultation, or your supervisor, your practicum site supervisor, has asked for you to come sit with them and do a consultation for whatever the reason is. So you'll be responsible for knowing when to seek consultation, and this may be in instances in which an ethical dilemma arises. When you feel you may have made a mistake, when you feel like you're not prepared to best support a client, and more. So if you feel it in your gut, you probably should be talking to a supervisor. If you are confused or uncertain, you should probably be talking to a supervisor. So again, knowing when to seek consultation. And those of us who are fully licensed, we still seek consultation from our colleagues in the field, from behavioral specialists, and different people depending on what we need support with. So just know, when do you seek consultation? The next subsection of this is going to be create and maintain documentation appropriate for each aspect of the counseling process. So if you recall us talking about records earlier, again, I don't know why this is not in order, and I probably should have just reordered it. But if you're following the NCE guideline that is attached below, or the link for it below, you'll see why I'm going in this order. So earlier you heard me talk about what types of intake forms and documentation needs to be included in the client records. You also heard me talk about progress notes. You also heard me talk about billing. You also heard me talk about assessments. If you did them, they should be in the records. You also heard me talking about communication. If you are communicating with a client in the portal, call logs. Those are things that is determined to be documentation. So, as a clinician, you are responsible for developing and maintaining progress notes, copies of assessments, payments, appointment history, insurance details, treatment plans, custody documents, call logs, and other general documentation generated when working with a client. The last one is going to be awareness and practice of self-care. You will be responsible for knowing when self-care needs to be incorporated, when to step away from counseling due to personal barriers, when to have someone temporarily support your clients because you're struggling with some limitations, knowing when to not overwork yourself, knowing best practice when experiencing burnout. Sometimes we work for agencies that have us working with 50 plus clients a week, but it's your job to take a step back and know what your limits are. Again, the bills gotta get paid. We know that. But the bills getting paid is at risk when you are burning out because you may be harming clients. Your skills may not be effective. These things are becoming personal barriers are now becoming professional barriers. So although you need to pay the bills and although your job says you have to see this many clients, sometimes you need to take a break. Sometimes you need to change the work environment. Sometimes you need to advocate for yourself to have a smaller caseload. Sometimes you need to ask for them to hire someone else to come in and take 5 to 6 of your clients off your load. So I know this video was kind of long. I didn't expect it to be this long, but I said all that to say is that for the first subsection, think professional ethics. How am I acting professional? How am I acting ethically? Questions that come up, you should be able to answer because again, think practicum. Was I acting professional in this instance? How did this show up for me in practicum? How did I respond to this? What did my site supervisor teach me? What did I learn in the ethics class? What did my university practicum supervisor person support me with while I was in practicum? Think, how do my clients perceive me? Am I supporting them? Am I harming them? Do I have documentation? The things. The ethics behind research and limitations of counseling, knowing when to refer out, confidentiality, think all of that. And because you've been in practicum and you've been in the field, these are things that you should be able to visualize on some capacity. So again, my name is Asha Creary. I am a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Texas and a licensed professional counsel supervisor in the state of Missouri. And thank you again for joining this episode of Post Grad with Asha. I know the video was long. I did do some asides. I didn't stick to the script. You know, it's hard following script on the iPad, but I did it. Anywho, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, listen to it on your ride to work so that you can soak some of this stuff in, listening to it in your sleep, whatever. Hopefully my voice is soothing enough for you to be able to do that. But yes, good luck with this first section. Take some time, read through the subsections and think about what that looks like and what that statement actually means. Again, the extra stuff that I included in the subsections is not listed on that sheet. This is how I broke every section down and what that could look like. So I hope me providing the examples were helpful, which is why the video is so long. And I hope you didn't zone out. If you did, come back and pick back up where you left off at. But breaking out each subsection, conceptualizing it, visualizing it, thinking about how you experience that in practicum, think about how your supervisors talk to you and navigated certain parts. So, hope this video helps. Thanks again for watching. You got it.